Welcome everyone to the Great Grant Information Session for Great Grant applicants and awardees. We really appreciate you joining us today for this session. Please use the Q&A feature on this webinar to submit your questions. We'll address these in our Great Grant FAQs on our website following the session. Today, the event is being hosted by Director Angie Bailey and Deputy Director George Collier of the Broadband Infrastructure Office. Without any further ado, I will hand it over to Angie.
Great. Thank you so much, Crystal. Thank you all for being with us today. We know this was kind of short notice for this session, but there's so much going on, and we just want to try to share kind of as much bulk information as we can as possible. So thanks for being here. Our goal for today is essentially just to kind of look through what awards we've made to date, what the review process has been, how we got here, and kind of look at the giant amount of work with GREAT that we still have ahead of us. So just to kind of touch base on a few things before we jump into the slides, we do consider a grant review period to be a quiet period. So we have been, kind of quiet over the summer, except for our FAQ questions that we've released. And we do still have more awards to make, but we are kind of coming out of that quiet period because obviously we need to start working with you all on the awards that have been made. We will also, we're also working on posting some additional information on the website about the awards made to date. And we will start to begin scheduling individual meetings with applicants or awardees, that have individual questions about your reviews. So that's coming up. So we're working on the best way to kind of fit in those meetings. We also know there's going to be a lot of questions around contracting. So kind of blocking off time to start working with you all individually on contracting. It is going to be fairly complex. Because we've got the federal rules this time with GREAT, and we've got these county partnerships. So it is a little more complex than past GREAT rounds. So again, this is just a broad overview for you all to try to catch as many of you as we can in one batch. And then we'll look forward to meeting with y'all individually as well. And we'll also begin, as Crystal said, updating our FAQs again. We anticipate a fair amount of questions coming in, especially around awards and contracting. So that's why we're here today. Next slide, please, Crystal. Or actually, I'm sorry, I have my notes up. So our GREAT awards to date, I think as you all know, as of the end of September, as of the end of August, I'm sorry, we have awarded $267 million in GREAT grant funds out of our $350 million. As you all know, this is ARPA State Fiscal Recovery Fund dollars. We've made awards in 92 counties to date. There is a 93rd county. We're working on their award. They have a protected area that was identified right before awards were made. So we're working through that process, and then we'll be announcing that award for the 93rd county. So again, with the awards made to date, it's 112,112 locations, total match of 146 million. And we've, as George is going to talk a little bit about the rolling awards process, but essentially the ones that we announced in July were counties where there were no protests, no ineligible areas, so we could evaluate those projects more simply and more quickly. The August 1st awards were also applications that had no protests, but some ineligible areas that had to be protected areas that had to be addressed. And then, of course, our big batch, August 31st, was the applications that had protests. So that's why we did those. That was the timing of those. And we're excited to have out the money that's out there right now. And just add one more thing before we go to the next slide for George. We know you all are swamped. We're very busy here as well. This is truly a partnership. We really couldn't do this work without y'all. So we know there have been quick timelines. They're quick for us as well. And we just thank you all for working with us to get to where we are right now. All right, next slide, George.
All right. Thank you, Angie. And good morning, everyone. I hope everyone is having a great day. And just to add on, just kind of the parameters of this meeting, it is being recorded and we will plan to post this video on our Federal Great website as well online. So, as you all know, our office made rolling award announcements. I think Angie just touched on that a bit. Our process for the rolling awards is on this slide, and I'm not going to read each bullet, but I'll talk slow enough so you all can look at the slide. So traditionally, especially for the ISP applicants that are on this webinar now, as you all know, in previous rounds, Great Grant Awards were finalized and announced all in one award round or one award announcement. Due to the volume of applications for this round, the office evaluated whether a rolling award process would be feasible to get awards made as quickly as possible. During our evaluation of whether or not to go this rolling award route, we determined that if we prioritize awarding one highest scoring project at the maximum grant amount in each represented county before awarding a second project, we would have a balance. So that was our thought process, our methodology, and that's what we did for the since the end of July through the end of August. Next slide, please. So how do we get to $267 million in total of awards to date? We opened the application window on January 31st of this year. The original application period closing date was April 4th, but we extended that deadline to May 4th. We publicly posted all applications and accepted protests from May 31st to June 20th. And then from June 21st through August 10th, we evaluated all of the protests and began sending notices. Now, July 18th was our first rolling award round, and August 1st was our second rolling award round. We identified the applications to award by determining that the applications in those counties were free and clear of any protests, and there were some ineligible locations we allowed for data revisions prior to any award announcements in July 18th and August 1st. August 12th through the 22nd, we notified all protesting applicable parties of our protest decisions, and we allowed applicants who were protested to revise their applications. And after reviewing all of the data revisions or the revised applications, we scored all of the applications, and we were able to make our bulk award announcements on August 31st. Next slide, please. As a summary, we received 305 applications when the application period closed on May 4th. There were 488,000 location points represented in 93 counties through 37 ISP applicants. When we announced our bulk awards, as of August 31st, there were 216 protests that we received and that we adjudicated. Ultimately, there were 280 applications in 93 counties that we scored, and we ended up awarding $267 million to 15 ISPs in those 92 counties for over 112,000 households and businesses. One county was withheld from the announcement due to a federal award, but we'll be making an award in that county shortly once we determine the overlapping areas with the federal award. Next slide, please. So how did our office review the applications? We had 5 different review teams, and I just would like to note a little bit about the office, especially for our ISP applicants that have participated in the state Great Grant rounds. In years past, the review team consisted of a few folks in our office, and we were able to, just due to the volume. Even before we got to our opening date on January 31st, we were able to hire a few key staff to help with this review. And, because of, the volume that we were anticipating, we felt that it was necessary to split our review into, 5 different teams. Our application eligibility review team reviewed the eligibility of every application based on the 14 plus requirements in our program's authorizing legislation. There were 13 statutory requirements, and then the authorizing legislation allowed DIT to add in additional requirements as we saw fit. So it was quite a review process once, going through the 305 applications with our application eligibility review team. We had a financial solvency review team that reviewed the financial solvency of the 37 ISP applicants. And, fortunately, we have staff with the finance experience to review the submitted documentation, for this application round. Our technical review team consisted of staff that have built and managed broadband infrastructure networks. So they reviewed the submitted technical reports. Our office is not going to engineer your projects, but what our technical assistance team or technical analysts, what they looked at is whether or not the project could get done in the time frame that we were looking at, and was what's required for our program. And we had a very specific or defined guidelines around the technical report. Our partnership review team determined if an applicant qualified for partnership points based on the proposed partnership submitted with the application. And then our mapping team consisted of staff from the Center for Geographic and Information Analysis, CGIA, and our bio staff that reviewed the mapping documentation and location data submitted with the application. And I think Angie and I have said this many times that, the mapping data is essentially the foundation of our program, and how we can determine the eligible and ineligible areas for the program. So ultimately, there were many spreadsheets and meetings to get to a point where we could score the application and begin identifying the awarded projects. And next slide, and I'll turn it over to Angie.
Thanks, George. Yeah, so again, mapping is really the foundation of the Great Grant Program. And as part of that, in our legislation, of course, there is a protest process that's listed in statute. So we did receive 216 protests for our applications. The protests consisted of more than 200,000 location points. And again, as a reminder, of course, you all know protesting ISPs can submit a protest if the proposed project covers an area that's a protected area as defined in our Great Grant Guidance document, or if the proposed project area contains 10% or more of total households with access to broadband. And that 10% rule being a new in legislation for this round. So that's so the protest process is a big piece of the review. Next slide, please. And so kind of generally, at high level speaking, as far as the analysis, so each protest is reviewed individually. Data submitted by protesters is analyzed for the following. So the granularity of information submitted by the protesters, the protected area piece, the 10% threshold. Did the protest meet that 10% threshold? There's something called self-protest, which is our term, but essentially we had situations where applicants submitted location points within their applications, and then those same providers submitted those same locations as part of their protests. And so obviously, a location is either served or unserved. And so in the case of so we call these self-protests. In the case where a point is showing up in both the provider's application and their protest, then we denied those protests and left the points with the applications. So we did get, some self-protests mixed in. We also look at comparison with the FCC Form 477 data and comparison with speed test data, meaning our NC broadband survey. As you all know, in statute, protest decisions are exempt from the contested case provisions of the Administrative Procedure Act. And of course, some protest data is deemed confidential. So we're kind of looking now at what we're able to share, what we're not able to share based on that, that information in statute. So that's our protest. Let's see, I did write down, sorry, let me find my notes again. So we granted 104 protests in full, 31 were granted in part, and 81 were denied. So that's where we were with protests. Next slide, please. And so moving forward, identifying eligible areas, you know, we know that this was a lot of work for you all as far as applicants that had to revise their applications. And what we're looking at moving forward is, you know, the FCC obviously has their new broadband data collection process that they're implementing. I don't know, I assume you all are tracking that closely. There's the serviceable location fabric piece, which is essentially all the addresses across the nation or within a state that should be receiving broadband essentially. So that location fabric is available. You all have probably submitted your data to the FCC using that fabric as of September 1st. We have requested access to the fabric. We're reviewing the license agreement right now. We will be participating likely in that challenge process. We'll be comparing the fabric to our address files from the NextGen 911 addresses. So that's kind of going on. I know this isn't a mapping update, but that's going on. The broadband availability data that will be, you all have submitted to the FCC September 1st. We are looking for the FCC to release that publicly in November-ish, but we will also be asking providers to provide that data to us directly as a state. So you'll be receiving something soon on that request. We will also be continuing the NC broadband survey. And we've also looked at the feasibility of somehow having the protest process or challenge process for these eligible areas happen at the beginning, either the beginning of the Great Grant Program and the beginning of CAB. You know, is there a way to identify and vet all the areas before we actually start receiving applications? And of course, this is in statute, so we'd have to work with the legislature, but that's something we'd like to figure out, and we'd love to talk with you all about that as well. So again, we believe this is the last great round that will have this particular set of mapping, at least with CAB, and the future programs we plan to be using the new FCC data. So we wanted to make sure we mention that. Next slide, please. So what's next in GREAT, this round of GREAT? There is a remaining $80 million. So again, we've made awards, or we're making the 93rd award, and then we'll have awards to all the eligible counties. As George mentioned, then we will look at the second highest scoring applications in each county, and we'll make awards from the highest scoring on down with a maximum of one additional award per county. And so this process is written out in our FAQs. The challenge, of course, is that there's a lot of overlap. And so we want to make sure y'all are aware of that. For this map of Wake County, you know, this is public data. We actually shared this slide with some of the counties because they're kind of having, you know, just to help them understand the overlap issue. But essentially, if you've got 3 providers like in Wake County, we've got, there's overlap between the dark blue provider with the light blue provider and kind of the southwest corner. There's some overlap between the yellow provider with the dark blue provider. And so essentially what happens is we have to deal with these overlaps before we can revise scores. And so right now we're looking at where the awards were made and which projects overlap that. And we'll be looking to you all to help us to essentially revise your application so we can rescore and get to the second highest scores. George,
No, I think that was.
Do you want to add anything?
No, I think that was accurate, Angie. I think there's going to be, you know, our office, you know, essentially is going to still provide a, a review, as these revisions come in and as we ask applicants to revise their applications and to determine if the project is still feasible after, we remove the awarded areas from, any unfunded applications. So there'll still be another round of review and revisions happening. And, we just ask that, you be patient with us as we, work through this process and awarding out this remaining $80 million.
Next slide, please, Crystal. So the other piece of it is, besides the revisions of duplicate areas or duplicate points for great, our CAB program is coming up next. So we won't talk much about this now, but the Completing Access to Broadband program. So it's the first kind of eligible option for a CAB project is to select an unfunded great grant project. And so all this text here on the slide is a lot. But essentially, it's saying that because these projects have been vetted fully through the Great Grant Program, the county would be eligible to choose the highest scoring unfunded Great Grant project for CAB funding if they want to do that instead of going through the additional CAB RFP process. So what that means, it means that they could quickly choose a project to fund, but it means that we're going to have to work to get all these duplicate areas resolved to have kind of clean projects for them to consider. So, and of course, if providers at any time don't want to, withdraw projects, if you remove too many locations, then of course that's an option as well. George.
Yes, ma'am. So additional information about the CAB program. So our infrastructure solutions team, that's led by Jeff Brooks, and that has Jim Corin and Keith Conover on that team. They're meeting will have met with all 100 counties by the end of this month. I think they're up to 77 right now. And they're talking to counties, gauging their interest in the CAB program. And we published part 1 of the CAB guidance document online. The document essentially is a more readable, I guess, if lack of a better term or grammar format than just reading the legislation. We will plan to have part 2 of our guidelines for CAB published sometime this year. We have a procurement partner on board that's going to help us develop the RFP process, that will be standard statewide. So we're not going, what we're trying to avoid is having 100 different RFP processes as we're going through the CAB program. So bear with us. It's the guidelines are part 2. The implementation guidelines are on its way. But if you would like to look at part 1, it is on our website now under the CAB program section of our website.
And just quickly on CAB, so what we're looking at is essentially having a convenience contract for the state. So basically a way to vet providers that want to participate in CAB and maybe stopgap in one bid where we would vet you all, you would become an eligible participant. And then when we get to individual counties, there would just be a scope of work released or bid essentially. But so we wouldn't be vetting providers, we wouldn't be collecting your financial information 90 times in 90 counties. You'd be vetted, and then in each county there would be an individual scope that interested eligible providers would be able to respond to. So that's where we are now. And again, as George mentioned, we have just brought on a procurement partner just in August. So you'll be hearing more about that soon. Okay, next slide.
So what about contracting for great awards? All of our awardees are wondering, what's next regarding contracting. All award announcements are contingent awards. We're working through a set of conditional items needed to enter into a grant agreement. Our plan is to verify matching funds first, and that the grant agreements are forthcoming upon further guidance and clarification from U.S. Treasury. There are still some questions, and not just in North Carolina, but nationwide. There are some questions about whether the recipients of these funds are whether or not they're considered subrecipients or contractors. We are advocating the contractor route, but we've had multiple communications with Treasury as well as some of our other partners as well, and we were told, or we're under the impression that there's going to be some further clarification around that issue. We've also heard from a number of counties that some of the awardees have contacted them about finalizing partnership agreements around financial contributions. We're a little concerned, well, not just a little, we are concerned about what we're hearing and how counties are interpreting these correspondences. It appears that there's a lot of misunderstanding from the counties and their General Assembly members that they've contacted to reach out to us. And, as Angie stated, we had an information session with the counties last week with our partner, the North Carolina Association of County Commissioners, and we notified the counties on that information session to wait for additional guidance from NCDIT before finalizing partnership agreements. If the partnership agreements that were submitted with the applications were not were just proposals and were not finalized. We also notified counties that depending on those proposed agreements that was submitted in the application and depending on how it was written, they are still not obligated to partner with any ISP. We've advised the counties to request correspondences in writing from the ISP awardees regarding any request for financial contribution if it's different than the documentation that was submitted with the application. A lot of the proposed agreements that we reviewed and our partnership team reviewed there were a lot of up to amounts. If an ISP were to get a great grant award, it was an up to amount. And a number of the counties that have reached out to our office, I think they were concerned that some ISP awardees may not have communicated what the expectation was for assistance, or there was some kind of misunderstanding. So what we've requested and what we've advised is that that the counties get these correspondences in writing from the ISP awardees, just so everyone can be on the same page, and that hopefully there's not a misunderstanding of that financial contribution and what the limits are and what the counties stated what they were anticipating to participate or anticipating to contribute if an award was made. So ultimately, our goal is to streamline any financial and administrative compliance issues dealing with the use of county funds if their source is ARPA dollars. We're using federal, state, and fiscal local recovery funds from the American Rescue Plan Act. Essentially, these are the same dollars that the counties are using. And then, my last point here, it's important to note that if an awardee qualified for partnership points and the partnership agreement does not materialize or falls through for any reason prior to entering into a grant agreement with the state, our office is obligated to reevaluate the project and rescore. I mean, because all of our applicants, the partnership points was a criterion in our scoring matrix, which is in our authorizing legislation. So ultimately, this could affect the award or even the match. So I just wanted to note that as I was closing, this slide here.
So just to add, we really understand that you all want to get these projects locked in and contracted, and we really want them locked in and contracted.
Right.
We're worried about counties, about you all having all different types of agreements with counties. We really would like to figure out a standardized, more simpler way to do this. And so that's what, so we are sending out a correspondence to the counties soon, and we'll be happy to share that with you all. And yeah, it's going to take a little time, but we just want it done right because these agreements are going to be with us for 5 years. So that's kind of our goal in asking for patience. As far as we did get a question about whether expenses can be incurred from the award date. So we'll be responding to that in our FAQs. We want you all to be able to lock in the funding, and if you all have thoughts for us on working with counties, they're not our direct partner, but obviously we want to be as helpful as we can in sharing information with them.
And Angie, I also would like to note too, on this call that there are some questions around, and this is something that I think we've talked about with a number of the attendees on this webinar is, the timing of the construction period for the project. We do understand, the material shortages and labor shortages and the delays in getting materials. And this is something that our office is aware of, and that we would also address in our FAQ document about how what would we do as far as timing and knowing the environment that we're in now with all the material delays and shortages.
So again, I know this has been a very short session and now we're already out of time, but please send us your questions, especially around contracting in writing, because we really need to be able to respond in writing. So we're everybody, the information flow and making sure we're all on the same page is so important right now. So please send those in, and we will be going back to the FAQ process to get things published. And we're happy to do another session like this. So if y'all want, just, send us your thoughts. And we really appreciate your time today. And we really appreciate all your work on the Great Grant projects.
And here's our contact information for reference, and any specific questions you have about, the next steps for the Great Grant program. We ask that you email greatgrantnc.gov. A lot of you know how to get in touch with me as well, and Angie. But to guarantee a response, greatgrantnc.gov would be your best avenue. Thank y'all.
Thank you all. Have a great day.